And it's a mission that is going to be increasingly international. Today, your armed forces stand alongside our armed forces in Afghanistan, which I've visited on many occasions, and let me say how we share in the sorrow of every lost member of your armed forces. Every death of our service personnel is a unique individual tragedy for them and their families. And as we fight for those common values in Afghanistan, we must also recognize that increasingly that is going to become a wider battle. Politicians love to talk about globalization, but they prefer the upside of globalization. They prefer to talk about the trade and prosperity side of globalization. But in an interdependent global economy, there is also an unavoidable importation of strategic risk. Our interests will be threatened in more parts of the globe and by more players than at any time in our history. And in many ways, we are trying to manage those complex interdependent threats with political structures that were designed for the post-World War II environment and military structures that were designed for the bipolarity of the Cold War. And we need to develop a much more appropriate way of dealing with global security than we have in the past. In the United Kingdom, we have been very much focused on what we have regarded as a multi-layered approach to security. And by that I mean that we have to be able to defend our own country from unique threats to our own country. We need to work bilaterally with appropriate partners to get the best result. And we have worked very closely with the United States for many years, but we recently signed a bipartite deal with the French. We look to our traditional partners in NATO for wider security guarantees, but we've also tried to work with new bilateral partners like Norway, which supplies 35% of the United Kingdom's energy supply, energy security being a major issue for the future. And we've tried to work with regional partners and to reinvigorate some of the regional security apparatus that we've had in the past. For example, we have a 5-power defence arrangement with Singapore, Malaysia, Australia and New Zealand, which again we have tried to put more effort into. And I think that wherever you view politics in the world and at whatever level, it's a very simple proposition. You either decide to shape the world around you, or you will be shaped by the world around you. And I believe that the values that you have, the values that we in the United Kingdom have, are a belief in what our own people are capable of if they're given the freedom and security to make the best of their own talents. The values we place in the rule of law, the values that we place in liberty and freedom, all those things are already a route map to the future, should we choose to accept them. And I think in both our countries, in their different ways, the challenges have been thrown down to this generation just as they were thrown down to generations before us. The question is, do we, like those who went before us, have the moral courage to accept those challenges? That, I think, is about whether we will be willing to pay the future price of the freedom that we all too often take for granted today.
I'd like to suggest our audience to ask some questions that they have to the gentleman.
I'm Genovier from Ilias State University. My question is, about the interest of UK to this region, whether there is any, or on what is the basis of it. Now we hear a lot that somehow in the last few years we found ourselves in kind of security vacuum because the US administration has less interest to this part of the world. Europe is, the EU is very much focused on its own internal problems. Turkey is interested in the south of it, and Arab world, etc. But UK has its own policy, its own vision, which doesn't coincide necessarily with visions of the EU. I mean, sometimes they say that there is no UK policy towards Caucasus because it's too insignificant a region. So how would you comment on that?
Well, I think that there is significant UK interest in this region and in this country. The fact that David Cameron, as one of the first acts internationally of his leadership, decided to come here and make a stand was, I think, enormously significant. And I know that he still has a very strong emotional attachment to here. And we have very warm relations with the government here and get frequent visitors from Georgia and London. I'm not sure that we feed them quite as aggressively as you feed the visitors that come to Tbilisi. But our particular political relationship is very warm. I think you're right in terms of the European Union. It is much too introspective at the present time, in a period where we need to be aware of the risks posed to our collective security, whether it be from the threat of transnational terrorism, whether it be from specific threats in particular regions such as we've seen in North Korea or we see in Iran at the present time. We can no longer expect that we can manage our security at a distance or even ignore threats in one part of the globe, because as we saw with the contagion in the global economy, which we saw with the natural disaster of the tsunami in Japan, the ripple effect from problems in one part of the globe can very quickly reach everywhere else. That's what it is to live in a sensitive, interconnected global economy. And so we cannot simply turn our back on areas which might provide political difficulties when they are essential to our own wider security. And I think that there is a shift in policy going on. I think that the new British government, which in many ways is a post-Cold War government, in that none of the senior members were in Parliament at the fall of the Berlin Wall, and that, I think, gives automatically a more globalised view of where we need to be. So in terms of looking at our multi-layered approach to that, we've looked for unique bilateral relationships. We've looked to see where we can pick up some of those that were ignored in the past and see where we can try to get the institutions to think more widely about the range of threats that will emerge. The idea that you can simply put up barriers around your own boundaries and think that that makes you safe is confined to a bygone age. That will not be the same again, because the more interdependent we become as a global community, economically, socially, politically, the more we will need to understand that we need to try to deal with some of those threats before they emerge. And I think this region is going to become increasingly important in the decades ahead. I thought it was interesting that President Obama singled out the Gulf and Iran as an area of very strong American interest, where there was going to be far greater investment in the future. I think that's correct, and I think it's a signpost for where policy will need to move in the future.